Welcome to Conversations to Understand Our World, interviews with Dr. Anthony Rizzi. I'm John Paul Ochoa, an Associate Humanities member with the Institute for Advanced Physics. Dr. Rizzi is the director for the Institute for Advanced Physics, which is bringing home all of our thinking to the basic things we see right in front of our face. We start with what we know through the senses, and that's the physical world. So therefore, physics, the study of the physical world, is the starting point for all of our knowledge. With this simple starting point, Dr. Rizzi will bring us back to our senses and then lead us to profound insights into all aspects of our world and beyond. We are used to thinking of physics as an equational kind of thing, and that's what it's been reduced to. But there is a simple way of understanding physics, and Dr. Rizzi, a world-renowned physicist, has this fundamental understanding, giving him deep insights. He will relay to you those startling insights and take you into the depths of our world to places that nobody else can. This week, our topic is, what is America? I think Fletcher's ready to begin the interview. Take it away, Fletcher.
Hey, Dr. Rizzi. It's so good to be back with you again on the podcast here.
Yeah, good to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited for our topic today. I've always been so interested in American history, so it's a real treat for me to get to talk with you about this. I think this is really important to be discussing the nature of America, especially it's been seems like the past year or so has just been really hard on our country. And it seems like, there's some kind of deep tension in our country that is sort of making us all wonder what is America? What does our country even mean? And so it's a big question, but can you just start us off, what's this problem we're dealing with? What is our country?
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good starting. It's just starting at the start. So, America is the first country ever to be founded on principle. Not because here's this land area and all the people in there have the same skin color and so forth. It's a deliberate it's a success to make a principle oriented, to say, hey guys, we should have a rational, ordered world, and let's make a country that is so. So it's defined basically according to the nature, according to the principles that arise out of the universe, and that includes our own nature, and founded on deeply implanted understanding of what that's called the natural law. The deep implantation happened by Christian culture over the decades, over the centuries, even the millennial and so forth, implanted deeply in there, and was therefore in the founding fathers like second nature. Kind of like the way, a kid that grows up in America learns to play baseball, or at least learns what baseball is about. So it's because it's in the air and you grow, and that's what America is. It's that, but then you had at the same time a misunderstanding of that nature that came about because of the misunderstanding of the scientific method that happened in the 1600s that was starting to attack these principles already. And that's what we're feeling. That's the beginnings of which we're feeling now. That's not the beginnings. That's the fruit, the deep fruit. It's far from the beginning. It's been a long time of attack.
Wow. Okay. So I got to ask, because the things you're saying are very different from, what I've been told in the past about the founding fathers. You're talking about how they have some kind of special formation that comes from Christianity even. So, I've heard that they're products of the Enlightenment and that there's something that they take from this age of reason. Is that true, or is that false? Or
yeah, that's right. That's how I start my article, What is America? Is with some of these false perceptions of what America is, which most people, pretty much everyone has different degrees. And, one of them is that it's an Enlightenment country. It's so it has this age of reason. And of course, it is true that it is deeply reasonable, like I just described, but the age of reason that they're talking about is not very reasonable. It's not reasonable at all. And I like to bring that point out. I like to contrast the American Revolution, which was built on these principles going back deeply into European history, and one's coming out of the misunderstanding of the scientific method they call the age of reason. A misunderstanding is hardly reasonable, right? It's hardly an age of reason. But to show you, while you have Americans fighting a revolution for justice, on the other hand, you have people walking down the street and saying, hey, you look like a good guy to get your head chopped off. Line up over here. And that's the so-called French Revolution. And that's coming from the fruit of this age of reason. And this is what these people, when they talk about the Enlightenment, that's hardly enlightened. So we really can't let them steal those words. It is true, when you read history books, you're going to have to see that, have to translate it. But that aspect of it is not enlightened. But what is enlightened is the scientific method and all the great things that came out of the scientific method that rightly were absorbed. And I like this quote. I think I have this quote here from Washington, talking about the nature of America, and in his, Thanksgiving Day proclamation, he realized that God was deeply involved in the world, like the founders tended to think, and always, really more than the tendency, they really had that in their character. And so he says, when he prays, and he says, Americans, pray and be thankful for the late victory of the Revolutionary War and the providence of God. He says, and we pray that you will promote the knowledge and practice of our true religion and virtue and the increase of science, that's knowledge, among them and us, and grant to us and to all mankind such a degree of prosperity, temporal prosperity, as you alone know is best. So this is sort of capturing the spirit of the founding fathers, which is not at all, what you tend to think because of the history books and just generally the false understanding. This is not the Enlightenment that you're talking about. It's starting to be infected by it, don't get me wrong, but it's not what you can see the spirit is totally different than what they mean by this exclusion of certain things that make it enlightened. That's not what makes it enlightened. It's the acceptance of the growth and understanding that comes with the proper understanding of modern science, which is just, and it's the beginning stages of infecting people. But maybe I should read, another example from a person, the traditional writer, talking about the founding of government. So to answer more about your question about the true nature of America. So this is a well-known traditional writer. He says, I have lived he's in a large meeting and he's trying to help people understand. And he says, I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? The sacred writings say, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain. I firmly believe this, and I also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. So who is this writer?
Yeah, please tell us.
This is Ben Franklin, your so-called deist friend that everyone will say is a deist, because he's a scientist. But it's not obviously true. But then, in case you have any doubt, Franklin continues. And by the way, this is in the Constitutional Convention in 1787 that he stops everybody and says this because they're going to proceed without prayer. And he further says, I therefore beg that henceforth prayers be imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessings on our deliberation be held every morning. So if you thought he was a deist, he's not.
Yeah, I mean that's what I've always heard. It's it's sort of like Franklin was like the chief of the deists
Yes.
of the founders. I just don't understand. I mean, you give these quotes, and I'm sure you probably have even other examples of other things that the founding fathers have said, but these quotes are so clear that, I mean, this is not compatible with deism. If deism is like the God set up the universe and left it, and everything's just going to run like a clock. I mean, they're praying, and it seems to be like in their bones that they just know that that's what you got to do. You got to pray if you hope to do anything successfully. So, I mean, why are people getting this wrong about the founders? What's blocking people from understanding this really important part of the founders?
Yeah, there's multiple things blocking, but the biggest thing is the thing we've already mentioned, and that is the gradual increase in the misunderstanding of science that makes you think that an equation is the only way to start your thinking, what I call the equation alone physics. So you start your understanding of nature with a symbolic system of symbols built to give some predictions. And that's, by the way, in the Kids' Introduction to Physics. I mean, I'm going to give short answers here, but the Kids' Introduction to Physics is very simple. It's not just for kids, as you know, it's for anybody, because we all need this sort of introductory material. But we say kids because it's accessible to kids. But the point is that background pollutes our understanding. So we're less close to nature than the founders were. The founders, the average American knows so much less than the average American. The average American now knows so much less than the average American did at the time of the Revolution. Certainly, much less than the founders. And their focus was on nature, and they built from nature. And it's more than just having in their bones. They knew at some real level that you could prove the existence of God. They did not think like the average American, and this is more evidence that people are disconnected from nature, is they knew you could prove the existence of God. They all knew, they didn't go around saying you believe the existence of God. They knew that you could prove the existence of God. And they also knew that you could prove the existence, that this was less digested, but they knew in some way that the soul was immortal through reason. So I don't think there was one of the founders that doubted that, seriously doubted it. I think they asked questions about it. But so that shows you how distinct we are from them.
Yeah.
We all walk around with beliefs, not knowledge, and that's the disconnection from nature that. But you can see it. The average person can see it because these men were farmers. Adam's family was deeply doing farm work. Abigail, his wife, was having to churn butter and do all kinds of things that put her very close to nature and her children. And so they're just natural. You were dead if you didn't know that. If you planted the way we think, then you would have no crops and you would starve.
Yeah. I should mention to our listeners and our viewers that your book, The Kids' Introduction to Physics and Beyond, actually takes you through the basic physics up to the first proof of God's existence. And so everyone, if you don't have it, you should go to iapweb.org and go to the store and get it. It's really important.
Yeah, and the physics, just to be clear, the physics is, as you know, just simply that which we see in front of us. It's not, the thing I was saying before, it's evident that everyone kind of feels this way, that, oh, physics, oh no, I don't want to deal with all that, numbers, equations and stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, look, you see something, that's the physical world. Physics, we have to get people to remember, physics is the study of the physical world. Look around you, there it is. You're not a stranger to it, just look at it. And that's what we have to get people back to, that not to live up here in the sky, not to live in the dirt, but right where things are at. I mean, by living in the dirt, I mean turn off your mind and live like an animal. Turn on your mind, and really deliberately we have to do this to be like the founding fathers were, where they cared about the intellectual life and they tried to look at the world and then understand it and spontaneously talk about it. And so this is not equational at this point, but it leads you to the point where you can see the equations at a very simple level, and that leads you up to God, and it leads you to the proof of the existence of God, which is a proof. And that's what we mean by know, is to actually be able to prove something, not just say, well, that sounds reasonable to me, or I told you to think that, so think it. It's not. It's something your human intelligence can grasp because of the way because of our own nature.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if these founding fathers had this understanding that you could even prove God's existence, and they knew therefore they knew the importance of things like religion, like the prayer you said from Washington talked about increase in true religion. Can you give us some examples? Are there any ways in which this thinking has become embodied in, the American culture, like that we do anything we still see maybe, but even, anything in the American culture that stands out as examples of how this thinking's been embodied?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples to think of, but the natural law has to do with looking at looking at the physical world, figuring out our nature, and then looking at our nature and seeing that we have a nature that made to know, and then you see we need each other in order to know. So all the amendments and all the things that the founders talk about are going back to our ability to know. So the First Amendment is basically about trying to make sure that we can have arguments with each other and learn from each other. And so, but it's one of the trite things people say about Americans is they're individualistic. Oh, it's an individualistic country. I'm sure you've heard
Yeah.
that before. You've heard that, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
and well, how individualistic can you be when you go into a World War II and you basically are this prospering, booming country, and it's a good tactic, right? Because people were not expecting this to happen. The Europeans did not expect, because they thought Americans were individualistic. They were not expecting this to happen. And what happens is this booming economy all of a sudden turns into a war machine. So you don't get to make all these commercial things, and you don't get to have all these. In fact, many of these people went into poverty trying to defend, as FDR said, against the people trying to attack our Christian religion. The evil people trying to attack our Christian, which of course was the Nazis. And of course that war, Americans intervened in and changed the course of. So, and then afterwards you have this, so-called individualist country putting in the Marshall Plan, which said, okay, not only am I not going to pillage and rape your country, but I'm going to rebuild it. As far as I know, that's never happened in history before. And so that's the example of the natural law coming out of Americans' thinking and action just sort of spontaneously. And another thing is, the murders and so forth and the awful things that the Nazis did to the Jews and to other groups were, there was no international law to prosecute these people, but the American government prosecuted them based on the natural law. And the Nazis, of course, said things like, oh, well, my chief in charge told me to do it, and all I was doing obeying orders. And that's, of course, outside the natural law. Intelligence says you don't have an excuse for doing evil just because somebody else tells you to do it. So they were prosecuted on that basis. So this is just a few examples around World War II to illustrate. Does that help your question?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And, especially that, that very helpful in terms of processing that claim of America being individualistic. It seems, like there's a kind of cynicism towards America that comes up in a lot of contexts where it's like, oh, it's, just out seeking things for its own good and doesn't care about any others. And it's a capitalistic country that's just trying to make money and, eat everybody alive in the process. It doesn't matter. And, but that's interesting with the World War II thing, because that just brings it home. The country just went through so much sacrifice as you said, to defeat the enemies attacking our Christian religion.
Yeah, that's FDR. People, that surprises people, but that's how deeply planted it is in the American spirit to think that way. And and of course, it's not to say that there aren't faults, that Americans don't have faults, and that the founding fathers didn't have faults, and that there's not errors in this or that. But we're talking about the principles of a country, and that you don't always live up to your principles, and that's what the unique thing is about a principle-oriented country like the United States, which again is the first one in history. You have these set of ideals that you put out in front of you that you're going after, and you can prescribe. You can say, okay, well, it looks like I failed, and now I have to try again, right?
Yeah,
and
of course.
That doesn't mean the thing is you succeed a lot. But another thing that people don't realize, is because of this American understanding of nature and of the deep implantation that came from Christian Europe, Catholic Europe, into America, they don't realize how much the Washington statement about science really is true. And so starting in like 1970, America has, even though only 4% of the population, has 70 to 80% of the Nobel Prizes each decade. So
Oh,
that
wow.
comes from focusing on growing.
Yeah.
Now, it does have this issue that we talked about, and that's really the side that you also have to be aware of, is this attack coming from the rear, which is to misunderstand the great science, the good science that really needs to, it's because we've ignored the science and not made it a priority that we've allowed, that we've gotten so far as we have. We just keep relying on sort of, crutches of the past. And then when those crutches fail, we just throw away the crutch and then we fall down to the ground. And that's what keeps happening over the past 55 years, especially. We keep relying on past things that we no longer even understand.
Yeah.
And we have to go back and understand those things. And the way to do that is to admit that our society has an area where it's growing every day, and that's in the modern scientific method, and to learn something about it, not so you become an expert and be able to become an equation guy yourself, which would only make the problem, would only make the problem go faster. But at least, but not at least, everyone needs to know the basics of understanding, and then as much as they can, so that they can at least recognize these errors, so they don't absorb them, and their children and their grandchildren can have a defense against basically having their minds ripped out of their head. Because you can't have America without each man having a mind.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually deeply connected to there's a 5-part series coming out soon called The Decision for Truth that everybody really needs to stay tuned for. It's coming soon. You can find the information below. But in that 5-part series, Dr. Rizzi goes through and helps bring all this out in more depth about what problem we've received through the culture and how we need to really get our minds back, like you're talking about.
Right. That's right. That's a 5-part series that it's coming soon, and it will do just what you just said. It'll make us look and see, whoa, how did I not know that? How did I not know that? and it'll make you say, what's my decision going to be? Am I going to choose truth? Or am I going to choose the easy path that the destruction is already laid out in front of me, that we've been going down for quite some time now, where we're seeing, I think people can sense that we're losing something. It's pretty obvious we're losing something important right now, that it's unlikely we'll get back if we don't recognize that's happening. And the way we do that is make the choice. And that's what I think everyone will really enjoy, just having those things put in front of them. And there'll be, the early reviews of it from people that looked at it, as they've always, whoa, okay, wow, I didn't know that. And that's the thing, is the first step, as Socrates said, is to realize you don't know something. And then people forget the second step. And then the second step is, you better go find it out if it's something you essentially need. You don't know it, because, of course, he's depending on the fact that you do want to know, and we all do want to know. There's a story, I remember a story one time on TV. It was about this woman who kept trying to find out what was wrong with her. She had some disease, and it was giving her all these symptoms, and she was just distraught, because she didn't necessarily, she wanted a cure, but mostly she wanted to know, what's going on? Why am I going nuts? What's happening to me? And she kept asking, going to doctors, and the doctors, I don't know. And they didn't seem to notice the angst that she was going and not knowing. Finally found a doctor who understood that her need to know.
Yeah.
And tried to, and really worked with her to figure it out, and finally did figure it out. But I don't think people realize that need. You can give yourself a headache, you can give yourself physical illnesses if you don't address your fundamental need to know. Everyone is naturally curious, and we've had that beaten out of us from childhood, and we don't necessarily. And so what happens is then other people tell us what to think, and that's not American. You're supposed to think for yourself, and you're not supposed to think whatever you want. You're supposed to think what's true. So you do ask for help, but it's in thinking, not in just getting orders. Right? That's the very distinction I was pointing out with the Nazis. You don't just ask for orders and do the orders. You ask for truth, and you try to process the truth. And there are people that know the truth, And that's why we have schools, and that's why, early on, Franklin established the libraries.
Yeah.
And all Europeans were kind of stunned that Americans, they weren't like these, snooty guys that talked about abstractions in the air, and they so that these can't be intellectuals, and they were shocked, like Dickens was shocked when he came to America and found that mountain men would come out, and these guys are supposedly backwoods people that didn't care. They had read his works, and they were questioning, "What do you think about this? When are you going to write this?" He was shocked about the deeply spontaneous intellectual nature of Americans. And that's what we have to remember. That's part of our heritage. The library that Franklin started, it's really the first time in history that you had this kind of system of libraries sort of blossom all over the country, where everybody wanted a book.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I mean, I feel like I've had these sort of like a somewhat of exposure to the American ingenuity and this kind of real powerful desire to figure things out, and it's like this American spirit, like like hear about like the Wright Brothers, first in flight.
That's right. That's a perfect example of the way that Americans incorporate this natural law, this understanding of nature. And it can look not very intellectual, right? Because it isn't like, and in fact, the Europeans are working on complex variables, trying to figure out how, and they had the wing a certain way, and they were trying, they can't figure out how the airflow would work and everything. And they're laughing at these two Americans who had the wing upside down and actually were making for the first time wind tunnel experiments to see what actually happened with the wing. Instead of making, empirological, by empirological, I simply mean equational calculations, and not coming back to nature. And it really characterizes Franklin's work too, much more close to nature. Again, as a physicist, and hopefully everyone else knows, that I really value that empirimetric, that equational physics, what we call empirimetric physics, that you learn about in my Science Before Science book, as well as the Kids Introduction to Physics book. And just generally on our site, iapweb.org, there's a Physics and Culture magazine that you can look at. But I really value that equational stuff. It's really important, and that's why we've been doing work to show what it actually means so that these errors can stop. But that work can't help unless each one of our audience takes it upon himself to be, aware of this issue and start learning over time, right? Like we said, schools came into existence for the realization that you don't just learn by saying, "Hey, memorize this, go away." You build. You start at the beginning and you build the house. And you go to this day of school, then the next day of school. Now, of course, we're not having you go to school. I mean, we do ask that you consider starting study groups and so forth. But, the point is you just sit and read, think about it, talk to people about it, get a few people together and talk about it. But, it doesn't have to be starting classes all over like you did when you were a kid or when you were in high school or college. But it does have to be, you've put some time into learning, because that's how learning happens. And so we have, podcasts and audio books and stuff that you can listen to. But you do have to do what Americans have always done, is you see a problem and you look to solve the problem. And, like you brought up the Wright Brothers, and I piggybacked on that, but throughout American history, you see a problem, you understand the problem, you solve the problem. And that's, like, okay, I can't talk to you, Fletcher. Then an American goes and invents a telephone. Now, there's complicated history to that, but it happened here in America. And you need like what we're doing now. You need that, so some American goes and invents the internet. That's why there's no .us. There's .uk and .other things. There's no .us because it was invented here. Yeah. So that's what Americans do, and we see a problem, and this is a huge problem. You can't just throw sticks at people. That's our decrepit tendency, not the true American tendency, which is, as we just said, to go fix the problem. And it's what the founders did, right? They said they didn't want to start a war. And, I think that they were hoping, they really thought that, okay, we'll just show them our reasonable grievances, and then we'll start with the king. But when things kept getting worse and worse and worse, and then finally it just went to the point where they couldn't go back. That's when they said, but even then they didn't say, kings are bad, we're great. They said, this should be justice in the world. Our natures require that we defend that justice because our fellow man's nature is at stake here, and we want to defend the dignity of man.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. They defended the dignity of man and, risked their lives in sacred honor, as they say, to do so.
Yeah. And I have something to say about that, but I just want to remind our listeners first that, Dr. Rizzi was talking about taking the time to study and form study groups and so forth. And you can find out more information about that at iapweb.org, forming study groups, especially around the science before science, which you can also find on iapweb.org. So just to follow up on what you were saying, Dr. Rizzi, people, like, you're talking about these founding fathers and like how they were, didn't necessarily want to get rid of the kingdom and everything, and that they were hoping to do things reasonably. I mean, it's often characterized as being this reactionary thing, and it's just like, okay, now we have the American experiment that's taking place, and it kind of has this feel that like, oh, we're just against kings and stuff like that, and so they got to do their kind of rebellious thing. But can you say a little bit about, is that true, or is there some depth to the American government? Was it just some reactionary thing that came out of nowhere in reaction to kings, or is there some more depth to it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the kings were, pretty much the major form of government up till that point. But there's a sort of evolution that happens in human thinking with time, and that, by the way, a revolution in thinking that happens with Christian culture, with Catholic culture for the first time. That historians can tell you that this is the linearity of time, where you have one thing happening in progress to the next thing and progress to the next thing. So you expect, as you progress, from like very little intersocial interactions, before people really figure out government and everything, to more and more interactions that are mutually beneficial. And as Aristotle already points out, that we need to have government, otherwise we can't work together. And we can't not only work together, because working together is the only way we can grow in truth. So we can't meet our major need, which is to grow in truth, to be more who we're meant to be the people that we're meant to be, that God has made us to be in our nature, in our particular nature, in our general nature. So, but that developed over time. And in fact, Western civilization, which is what we're talking about, which every plant grows out of a garden. It doesn't grow in vacuum. It doesn't grow in what we call plana, the absence of massive particles. It grows in the presence of all kinds of stuff in a garden. And the garden that this can grow in has to be fruitful. It has to have the nutrients, and that's the garden of Western Catholic civilization. And so maybe it'd be helpful to show you what this garden had already produced at the fertilizer level, that hadn't been implemented in government, and evolved to the point where man could actually implement it yet. But it was being thought about, and everyone agreed at some level. I'll read you, if I can find it in this is my article. This is my article, What is America? That just published yesterday. Then I'm read from it from the Summa Theologica of St. Thomas Aquinas, who was sort of the chief intellect of the Western civilization, really implanted the basic things from the larger Western culture, Catholic culture, and really developed that thinking to a higher level than it had been before. So here's what he says, talking about asking himself the question, what's the best type of government? So let's see what St. Thomas Aquinas thinks about the best type of government. Now, keep in mind, this is the 13th century. This is a long time before the American Revolution. Here's what he said. Accordingly, the best form of government is in the state or kingdom where one is given the power to preside over all. Where one man's given the power to preside over all, my note, that's the president. While under him, others having governing powers, that's the Congress, and yet a government of this kind is shared by all, because all are eligible to govern, and because the rules are chosen by all. That's the democracy. For this is the best form of politics, being partly kingdom, since there is one head of all, partly aristocracy, insofar as a number of persons are set into authority, and partly democracy, i.e. government by the people, insofar as the rulers can be chosen from the people, and the people have the right to choose their leaders. That's why this is that's a republic.
Wow.
So that's the end of St. Thomas's statement. Basically,
Wow.
the definition of the American government.
Well, that's the 13th century.
13th.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite stark.
Man,
So that was, by the way, that was planted then, therefore, and it's common knowledge built in. And when you finally got people like Filmer pushing, wanting to turn kings into something that Western civilization, Catholic thought never accepted, he had to go against these people and say, we want divine rights of kings. Whatever the king says, we have to do. And there's no other kind of government that's any good. He had to write, and Jefferson had a copy of this Filmer speaking against one of the great writers on this, who's actually St. Bellarmine. And in the paper, you'll find a comparison between the thought of Bellarmine and the Declaration of Independence, and you'll see it's like almost like he didn't copy it, but it's as if he copied it. Because why? Because he's formed. Is it a surprise that a father that teaches his son says what the father says, even if he hates his father?
Yeah.
He says what he's formed to say. And Jefferson, he didn't hate him, but he didn't really know where his ideas come from totally. But when you see it, you'll see it's stark how much the same. And you see that how the scientism, that's this taking of the scientific method is the only form of knowing. That's the scientism, taking the scientific method is the only and first form of knowing. That leads you to miss basic things about your country and the world. And the fact is that we can look at our country and we can see these values still present in the documents if we're careful to look right. But these confusions have led us to think that, for example, the Western civilization only likes kings, and that the Jefferson hated kings. And in fact, as I just said, these ideas were in the air, and everyone knew them, especially in England, because in England had the unique situation in which the common understanding of the rights of man that come from your nature was under attack, and they got the opportunity to more fully form it in Magna Carta, which is in 1215. So these things are in the air in Western civilization. They're being more crystallized by the intellectuals, and most especially Thomas Aquinas. And this other person, Bellarmine, had something to do with that as well. But there's others in between that are further crystallizing it. And they're picked up in various ways by the founders. But mostly it's just in their bones. It's what they've been raised with. It's the milk that they've been raised on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. You pointed out the example of the Declaration of Independence. You talked about you have like the side-by-side showing the influence of St. Bellarmine on the writings of Thomas Jefferson. It seems like the founding documents of America are really important in terms of sort of encapsulating those principles. Do you have any other examples of how they do that?
How they encapsulate the principles of the natural law?
Of the natural law, yes.
Okay, yeah. So let me just back up a little bit, if I could, and say, Lincoln has this great statement that he says that in defending, he had this great role of defending the founders against those who thought slavery was incorporated in some way in the founding, which of course it wasn't. It was exactly the opposite. And he had this great role, and in that, he really articulated something quite right. He said, look, the Constitution is the setting of silver, and the apples of gold are sitting in this So basically, the Constitution and the Republic are all coming out of the principles of the Declaration. And the Declaration is nothing but a reference back to the natural law. So the natural law, all these things that we see about our own nature and the things around us, right and wrong, truth and false, justice, all these things that people already half-formed understand, are articulated very clearly by the thinkers of Western civilization, and then got put into the American thinking and American action and American character. And so an example would be, if you're coming to looking at how the court made decisions over time. So they come to having to deal with the Mormons wanting to have polygamy. Now, there's no, of course, specific law in the Constitution against polygamy. There's no, of course, international law at this point. So that would leave a modern who starts with, I need to have a system and a bunch of rules to tell me what to do. But it doesn't leave the court like that. The court says, basically, this is against the natural law. You can't do it. So that's it. We're not going to let you do it. And they stop it because it's a generic principle that comes out of human nature that would cost the culture and go the opposite direction of the way it should go. And we've been losing that because of the scientism, and that's why we have to go back and take the time to take the rod out of our own eyes, as Christ says, take the rod out of our own eyes, get our own thinking straight, prove stuff to ourselves, and that takes time. It's not something somebody can just tell you. You have to sit down and absorb, and think and ask yourself. It's a contemplative thing to do. It's what you have to do to really understand things, is take some time and think, and then talk to people that know. The Institute's available here. You can write us, email us, but the material is already there. You can start talking to your friends and start this process going. And when you get to the point you just can't figure something out, give one of us a call. We'll work with you and try. There's different levels of involvement that when the decision for truth comes out, we'll give you a lot more options. So really, I encourage everybody to keep track on IAPweb.org when the decision for truth comes out, because it'll give you a lot of information on how to do this more particularly. But already you can get the kids' introduction to physics, get it for your grandkids, work with your grandkids, work with your kids, and interact with people. That's how you learn. And we should be like Americans are. There's a problem, I'm going to educate myself and then fix the problem.
Yeah,
I don't leave it to somebody else. I say, look, I'm here to help. And can I give you one more example of the non-individualistic nature of America?
Oh, please, yeah.
Because it just strikes me how people think that, and that we really need to work together on this project, and get a friend, just even within your family, that kind of interaction needs to happen where you work with your kids. Think about things with your family. Don't just silly things have their place, but that's the ornament on this. And so, but just to show you that we do have this spirit, and we need to regain it and re-own it. One of our members, a long time ago at one of our conferences, had to drive across the country to come to our conference, which was at that time was at Notre Dame University. And he was from Ukraine. Actually, he is an American, but he's been living in Ukraine for a long time. Actually, I think he might have been born in Ukraine, emigrated. I can't remember. But anyway, he had been saturated in Ukraine. And he got in this huge car accident with his 5 children and his wife, 6 children maybe.
Oh, wow.
And it was kind of scary when I first heard about it. But he then said he was someplace in the middle of Indiana. And all there was farms around, nobody to be seen. But as soon as the accident happened, he said people poured out of their houses. And they all stopped everything they were doing to help this family. And that's what kept them from having any serious injuries.
Oh, wow.
But he was like, whoa, that would never happen in a million years in Ukraine. Never happen in a million. But that is the American spirit, this helping each other. And when we had a big flood here, I can't tell you, it wasn't the government, it wasn't local government, it was people that helped us. They just came out and they helped because that's what Americans do. And so this is the thing is that when you have self-responsibility, then you can help other people. You have to be first acknowledge that you have to be responsible for yourself. And
Yeah.
that means in this case, really knowing what you need to know. These are basic things. These are basic things that we were robbed of in our childhood that we have to go get. The Kids' Introduction to Physics and these things. And this article, What is America? These are new things, but they're also containing very basic things. It's not a hard article to understand. It's very easy, but
Yeah.
it's something you don't understand. And to save America and to save our families, which we really should want to do, and I'm sure most people do, then we have to do it, and that's the way Americans respond. There's a problem. Let's go together and fix it.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. I mean, this is really opening my eyes, and I'm sure it'll open a lot of people's eyes to we have such a profound heritage that we've got to, if we want to save it and tap into it and let it grow, we've got to get our thinking straight, and then by doing so, then we can actually let it grow the way it's supposed to grow. Yeah,
and this is, you really can't. It's very hard to exaggerate the importance of this, because the last place that Western civilization has a serious foothold is the United States. If it gets lost there, the scientism has no resistance, and the good part of the science will then become wholly, oriented towards the kind of negativity, the kind of dystopia that we're seeing being created as time goes on, where we don't really care about our fellow man, we don't involve ourselves in our fellow man, and we substitute a huge bureaucratic system between us and them, and we're less and less aware of the angst and the emptiness and his hunger for truth that is not being fed, that he himself is less clear about, and becomes more and more sort of scatteredly trying to fight back against he knows not what.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that certainly raises the alarm bell. It's time to act. And
and that's good, because we're out of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wish we could keep talking, Dr. Izzy. It's really great. Well, I just, for everyone listening, to hear more about this America stuff you've been hearing today, you definitely need to get the America article. And then just to more broadly understand what's attacking us and our culture and how to get fixed from the problem we're facing, please check out Decision for Truth. But thanks so much for coming on, Dr. Izzy, and we look forward to the next podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Fletcher. You too. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
Stay tuned now to ask Dr. Rizzi your questions and hear those of others. Q&A will immediately follow this podcast. The Q&A link will appear in the description below this video. You may need to refresh your page to see the link. And in addition, look for an exciting 5-part series, Decision for Truth, coming April 19th at 8 p.m. Central. These times will be posted on Facebook and Twitter. In the meantime, get your copies of these resources today. You can get Dr. Rizzi's Kids' Introduction to Physics and Beyond, that gives the essential foundation that you need for all your thinking at the iapweb.org site shown. Also, you will need Dr. Rizzi's The Science Before Science, which goes beyond the kids' book and explains the basics of life. It is available as an audiobook. Also, get the audiobook of A Kid's Introduction to Physics on that same page. Articles that address issues like you just heard in the podcast are available at the Physics and Culture magazine at iapweb.org/magazine. All this information is available in the description below this video. You can also find links to the unofficial IAP Facebook and Twitter pages below. Thank you.